Welcome, folks, to the Squeaky Wheel. I'm the captain, Ross Memphis Pambrun. With me is my friend and co-host, as always, the president, Lawrence Gervais, broadcasting from Calgary in the Region 3 heart of Métis Nation of Alberta, which is part of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We'd like to acknowledge those lands that we're on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Nakota, with whom we share the land on the basis of historical and ongoing relationships. We'd also like to thank you to our First Nations friends, to the Métis settlements, our Métis brothers and sisters and families. We'd also like to give thanks to our elders for the guidance, for Mother Earth, who shines a light down on us and gives us her wonderful bounty. And without further ado, Lawrence, let's start burning this fire down. So, Lawrence, I know our guests always get to hear about us, but here's our opportunity. Folks, we're going to tighten our speed up just a little bit. So just to bring everybody up to speed with the Squeaky Wheel, we always usually have a guest on. We talk about everything that happens that's current and local. We talk a little bit about coffee in our format. We have some issues that relate to the province, to the municipality, to our region, to our nation. We have some Métis connection. We'll talk a little bit about that. And Lawrence usually brings us up to date on what's happening within our region and as well as within the province, how to connect with us, and what to expect, and then usually Lawrence and I rant a little bit. So, Lawrence, before we jump into too much conversation, tell me a little bit about yourself, something different.
Well, let's see. It's not really about myself. I usually, when you ask me that question every episode, I usually go on to some other sort of, because I don't normally like to talk about myself.
Yeah, you usually do.
But I mean, we're pretty excited. We're in the midst of Métis Week now, and it's it's a very exciting time for a Métis across Canada to really celebrate or commemorate Louis Riel's passing and celebrate being Métis and having events, dances, jigging contests or fiddle, lots of music or, it's just a lot of fun. We look forward to it every year.
I know one of the things that I hope I get challenged on sometime, probably not this year as a result of the fact that we're not hosting as many live events, but with the exception of the fact that as soon as I get through this damaged Achilles of mine, I do have to try and participate in a jigging contest. Because I know you being, having been a professional dancer and me just being real good on the dance floor, I do need to take that challenge on. So folks, the next time you see us and we're at a real fun event, I want you to call me to the stage and make sure that I take my time to participate, because I as much as I enjoy watching them, I've just never really felt that there's been a time where I need to get pulled out there. But I think we need to connect more.
I find at a certain age, it just becomes a jiggle rather than a jig, so that's the common joke, right?
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that was the whole reason that I've been trying to avoid it. So to jump into what we normally do, folks, today's coffee is brought to us by Pambrun, which now I normally like to support local. I know, Lawrence, I have a damaged leg. I can't drive. As a result of that, I pulled something out of my archives, as it were. And this is an espresso that's from Miami. And it has just the darkest, deepest. And I'm actually drinking it out of my mug that my wife gave me. And it says, "You're the luckiest guy in the world. I would love to be married to me."
Right.
And every time I drink out of it, I absolutely smile because it.
Are you sure she bought that, or is that something that you got?
Maybe it's just something that I bought for myself. So, big shout out, folks! If you can find this in any of your local coffee stores, please let me know, or any of the markets, because I'd love to get more of it. So, Lawrence, let's get into a little bit of conversation about some of the current issues out there before we jump too far in. Oh, though, actually, before we do that, big thank you to George Pambrun, my father, for participating last week during Remembrance Day ceremonies and keeping us up to speed with the unique challenge that it was to be an Aboriginal veteran. The challenge it is to be a veteran, and the lack of connection that seems to happen at the elderly age now because we're so far separated. Last week's coffee, I think, came to us, that maple one from the Okanagan, and you updated us on everything that was sort of happening within the local and the region. So, Lawrence, I'd like to talk a little bit about school outbreaks. This is our current topic of the week. And before we jump into all of the regional stuff, let's talk about that. What are we doing, and what is our province doing to help?
Well, the province have, sort of laid out the near normal circumstance from September, and we're kind of seeing a lot of those effects. And you are right. I mean, my opinion, it is happening at a certain level of schools, or if it's, where places just where kids are sort of congregating, and, it's kind of spreading to them and coming home. And then we're having Thanksgiving and we're having Halloween, and, that doesn't help our numbers either. Mm. But I think just everyone just needs to breathe, and relax a bit. And they want it to be near normal. I think everyone's having this COVID fatigue, and people just want it to be, hey, just, an everyday thing. But, we just have to be extra careful, because the more and more numbers increase, the potential rate for more infections, and then we're in a serious lockdown, and which would affect the economy.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Everybody needs to pull the reins back just a little bit, because it's not, I don't think that we are desperately concerned that we're not going to see the numbers rise, but what we're seeing is that as the numbers rise, we overwhelm the healthcare system. Yeah. And I think that was the message that the physicians were trying to make. Here we put the kids back in school, hoping that we wouldn't see a rise as quickly as we were. But as a result of that rise, all of a sudden, healthcare system gets overwhelmed. And, people, we have to look at it and go, just because your family's not in there utilizing the healthcare system, if it needs to utilize it, it could be full, and you don't want to be a part of that conversation.
And also, they number the ICU beds, and if those are at a, I think when this airs, hopefully it's down, but as of us filming this on Friday the 13th, I think it's up 71% of the ICU beds are being used in Alberta right now. So,
yeah, boy, it's frightening. And having been an ICU nurse myself, and my relationship of knowing Regan's experience, the director of medical health for the Métis Nation for the province, her knowledge and the information that she shares. Folks, if you go to Métis.org, our provincial relationship, and you go to that website, all sorts of great information. As well, families should be going there to find out what other opportunities there are for their support, whether it be sports, whether it be education. We do a great job. I think you do a great job, Lawrence, of sharing that message regionally. And I think the locals are doing a great job of starting to share that message. But it comes from the top down. And we also have to make sure that, folks, whenever you ask us questions, Lawrence and I talk about them. So thank you to our listeners. Thank you to our YouTube subscribers. Thank you to everybody. We take that message back and we have these conversations. And Lawrence has a lot of these conversations. So no, that's great. Now to jump into a few things, Lawrence, when it comes to Métis connections in our community, let's talk harvesting. I actually have to look up to see when the close date is on that application. But folks, right now, there's the conversation that's happened for a long time historically about the rights of Métis for harvesting throughout our province. There seems to be lots of conversation about, well, where were the Métis and how do we prove where the Métis were and where were these families and where did they get allowed to hunt? If you want to participate in that, and I highly recommend you do, if you go to the Métis.org website and you go to the harvesting section, folks, even if you don't think you're going to hunt for sustenance, even if you think you may not fish for sustenance, if you fill out that document and ask for the information, what it does is it sends a message to the government. And as we develop the sort of our citizenship, it says to people in administration, we need to have the conversation. But if only 10 people ever get back and fill out that document, well, do we really have to have this conversation? So highly recommend it. But take me a little bit through, Lawrence, regarding some of the harvesting history. And I know we had a unique challenge. I think it was last year with the
you go down to Section 35 and, what constitutes a right to the land and to harvest. And for an indigenous group this size, you kind of have to not sort of pick and choose as a government who who adapts to that Section 35, even though they are constitutionally protected and they're sitting in front of you, just as much as how the Mi'kmaq can go and do their, harvesting rights. It's constitutional, and these companies and governments or institutions think that it's, oh, well, we can just sort of breathe by them. But, you know, if it ever goes to court or gets legally challenged, they tend to lose, right? Because there's so much case law around it and so much agreements. And you go all the way back to the treaties when the Royal Proclamation was happening in 1763, which is primarily based on UNDRIP now. Yeah, I mean, you sort of infringe on those rights. And for us down here in Region 3, because Cabinet advises Alberta government of, you know, surrounding Hersecorn, and that's how they base their decision. But, you know, since then we've had Daniel's decision. We've, you know, for instance, Powley is a prime example of hunting rights in Ontario, which kind of bled to our sort of citizenship and our registry and what we sort of based our Powley test on. But, you know, we sometimes can infringe on, you know, the next generation. And that's the most important thing. If my children don't get the harvesting rights to the land, well, then how am I, and I don't have it. Well, how am I supposed to transfer any knowledge to them? And then how are they supposed to transfer any knowledge to the next generation after that? So, you know, we have to be extra careful in these times.
Very good point, because historically it was the elders, and even if you look back First Nations world, it was the elders who were sharing the history, sharing the conversation, sharing the message. You know, we weren't writing things down as much. And if we don't continue to bring these conversations forward with our provincial representatives, they'll just fall by the wayside. And if one generation misses it, the next generation isn't thinking about it. So no, I totally agree with you there. These are the conversations we have to have now in order to protect the rights of our citizens as well as the future generations.
And, you know, there are groups out there that are opposed to Métis harvesting because it's one more or less animal for them to procure, right? So, you know, you have very large hunting groups out there, or brigades as sort of they're called, ready by walkie-talkie to go out and hunt on their ATVs and go out and look for a deer. But, you know, we look at that as not traditional hunting activity to us, right? Ours is just a little bit different. And, you know, ours is closer to what the First Nations are doing. But then, you know, First Nation groups obviously would have a problem infringing on their animals too. And I understand that too. But, you know, we have to maybe possibly work together and lock this in and readjust to allow Métis sort of to help navigate and help those families in these communities too.
And folks, if you're listening to us out there and you have questions regarding this, tsw@métis3.org and we'll answer your questions. But also make sure you go to our website, métis3.org, and get the information about our region and what's happening. So always thanks for that connection. Lawrence, let's talk Métis Week. Now, we know, but share that message again, because we're going to talk a little bit about Louis Riel, and why November 16th is so important. But this year, November 15th to the 21st, events are happening for Métis Week. Let's just talk a little bit about it. Folks, if you want to know more about a lot of the events that are happening, go to métis.org and you'll see things that are happening. But yeah, let's talk about that as we lead into a bit of a conversation, because there's been a struggle for the last many, many years about the conversation about Louis Riel. So how do these tie together?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of controversies to, you know, the history of, you know, even Métis or acknowledging, you know, Louis Riel as a leader, and people have varying, you know, opinions about it. And sometimes they're taught in schools to the academia too, which affects, you know, sometimes Métis relationships to government and industry too. And we, you know, as a Métis nation, always try to say, well, if you want the complete history or the knowledge, come to the source. Look us up in Google and you'll find it out. And Louis Riel is, you know, not really a controversial figure to us, because he was a leader who had, you know, very articulate knowledge. There's always myths about him being this person who was incapable of, you know, really representing himself, of being an insane person and all that stuff. And we kind of mitigate that response by proving that, you know, it was a different story, and government documents actually support a different scenario and a verbatim, right? So as long as you're speaking to the Métis Nation, you'll get a different perspective about everything about Louis Riel and all those myths. And that, one big one that we always sort of have to be cognizant of is, well, how did the Canadian government even have a right to lay a charge of high treason to somebody who wasn't a current Canadian citizen at that time, right? So it's right. Kind of, you get into all these discussions and many appeals that happened when he was sitting and he was giving his 2 speeches, which are pretty famous speeches, when he was on trial, talked about, his appeals to the White House, his appeals to Ottawa, his certain things that he was doing. And everything was certainly completely ignored when, Judge Hugh Richardson just laid the guilty charge on him and he was hung for treason, right? So I always say that Métis Week is important, not only for Métis people to celebrate, but what we want our institutions and schools and governments to put it on their blogs, get it in the classrooms, get everyone to understand the real story about Louis Riel and his impacts in Western Canada.
Awareness, which is, hey, this is what Squeaky Wheel's for. When you talk about the speeches, where does the term downfall fall into place? Is it when he stood up? Is it
Well, I think it was all the years prior to that. I mean, if you go all the way back to 1870, he had a lot of support, in Manitoba, specifically in Western Canada, and representing the Canadian Northwest Métis. Oh, sorry, it wasn't Canada back then, but the Northwest Métis. Sorry, I should be specific.
No,
but,
we understand. Yeah.
When Confederation was coming in, he was negotiating with other Métis and Hardisty on the Canadian government's behalf, and really laying out the terms for even Manitoba Act. But when Thomas Scott and the Orangemen that he represented, and him being this and Louis Riel's face, and then of course he was executed by Métis soldiers, and certainly at the behest of Louis Riel's action too. He was against it, but he certainly represented that community and how it related to the rest of Canada. And at that point in time, the Métis became the enemy, and certain dispersal happened after that because of the army that was moving in to sort of extradicate all the Métis in that area. So, that's when it all started. And then there was we against Métis or we for them, and it was just back and forth continually, right? Throughout his life.
I think he would be, and we should consider this one shortly, putting that on our Muskrat Tales. I know we're doing a great job here on the Squeaky Wheel of sending out our little vignettes that touch on those. And the great thing about us having these conversations is we're hitting home to identify what is uniquely Métis and uniquely Métis for its conversation. And Louis Riel being that center figure. I know that there's lots of them out. There's lots of information, but maybe you and I, we just need to condense something and shoot one here so that we're sharing with the youth, including myself, learning what was happening at 1870 and 1885 of the Northwest Rebellion and the Northwest Resistance, and the conversation of where Louis Riel
so
was
I mean,
at the time.
and that's the other thing too, is what we want our movie makers and film artists and all them to start telling the story and tell the real story, and work to the Métis Nation to get to the real story. We have fantastic Métis historians currently and the younger ones that are coming up that are very excited about doing more work in our community, right?
Yeah. I have to think that there's, to all those filmmakers who are out there, hear this message. Look for the funding. There's great places online that are trying to open up opportunities for Indigenous artists to develop shows, to develop the conversation. I think I would look great as Louis Riel with one of those long coats. So if you're looking to cast somebody, folks, just look at me. Here's a profile on the side. Here's the other profile.
I think you look more like Gabriel Dumont. But here's what I've seen in the past that they've done. I think 2 Louis Riel movies that I know about. One, the main character was French Canadian in one, and the other one was Aboriginal Billy Morassi, who I love to death Billy, and I know him, but he's First Nations. But I mean, and he's a tremendous actor. But I think, maybe it's time for us to even choose one of our own to lead the charge. Who knows? Right.
Yeah. You know, who knows? You know what? That's a great idea. And not to get too much into the politics of how Hollywood hires and fires, and even trying to think of that delightful actress who was recently chastised because she acted as though she had a bad arm, and she didn't actually have a bad arm in real life. So she was kind of appropriating.
Is that kind of like having a bad leg and, pretending you have a bad leg?
Yeah. In my case, yes, I'd have to play myself if we do the online or the movie, the Hollywood blockbuster of the Squeaky Wheel. I'd probably have to play myself. Lawrence, I'd like to talk a little bit about, I just want to say thank you to the city of Calgary for their role with the Field of Crosses and their honoring of Remembrance Day. Big challenge. We all wanted people to stay home. How do we share that message when we're all at home? How do we tell those veterans that we're doing something? Again, any chance you get it when to see a veteran, folks, thank them, ask them about their service, or show your appreciation for it. So
yeah, well, what I noticed online, like even on Facebook and LinkedIn, was just so many commemorate photos of people's family members who served, right? And I think it's getting more and more better. And I think that's how we acknowledge it, because, every time I would come across, I would try to like as many as I could, because I think we acknowledge other people's sort of family roles. You don't realize that, everyone has a grandfather that's probably affected by the war at some point, right?
Yeah. And the families. And I always bring this conversation up. Thank you to the spouses and the families who were left at home and didn't have the opportunity to see those family members and had to make that sacrifice themselves. So a big shout out to the city of Calgary, and thank you for always commemorating that. Now, to jump forward to a few more things, sadly, we can't talk sports. Well, really, we can't talk hockey. We can't talk baseball. We could talk a little bit about football. There's just not much going on out there. So I know we've had some long podcasts, and when we don't have our guests, I think it's shortening them up so that we hit all the highlights is important. And again, thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you to those people who subscribe. Thank you to the people who send and ask us questions and who share this message. Rupert's Land, this is a big time for students right now. Kids, make sure, adults, anybody, you want secondary education, you're Métis, you want to explore that opportunity, go to the Rupert's Land Institute. And I know I've shared that message before. And Lisa Cruikshank, who's the director there of Métis Education, so wonderful and always shares and is very engaging. So to jump to our rant, Lawrence, I think I've talked a little bit about how people have the ability to connect with us. This is little Kleine Groendrachen, which is a little green dragon. He's a little fire dragon. Since I'm so badly beat up, he represents the good side of me right now.
Don't they start fires, dragons?
Well, this little guy is too small. I think he actually just creates a little bit of smoke and dust around the area. I kind of have him here because he reminds me of you.
Yeah.
Though I didn't anticipate that there'd be as much facial hair, but yeah, he's he comes from Germany. But to rant about something, the thing I wanted to bring up in order to help close out our show was, folks, follow the rules. We're seeing tighter lockdowns. The quicker we work through this and not overwhelm our system, the better. I know our restaurants and bars are going to have to close at 10 o'clock. We are trying, it seems like we're trying to work, the province is trying to work at keeping families going to school, trying to keep some sports as best they could to keep the kids engaged with each other, but watching what's happening. So support local. Try to support your restaurants, your favorite restaurants. You may not get the chance to meet your friends down there. Order from the same place and do a virtual meeting. At the end of the day, you're still connecting with your friends. Make that time. That's my rant today. Lawrence, what's yours?
Well, I don't have much of a rant. I mean, if we want to get into sports, we can talk about, the first female general manager for, the Marlins. I think that's great. I think it's fantastic.
It's time.
And apparently Derek Jeter had some of the, decision in that hiring. So, all the best to him.
Is
right?
that right?
So,
I had a conversation a number of years ago, and it really opened my eyes with a senior scientist in social aspects and epidemiology, and she was saying that it's about understanding that there's a different perspective. And again, men and women sometimes don't always see eye to eye in every situation, and sports being one of those ones where the boundaries are starting to be broken down and they're starting to come down. But understanding that that you have to look at everything from another perspective. So,
but you think about it. She was an executive for or involved in baseball for 30 years, and she has 3 World Series as an executive. Well, then she's laid the groundwork enough to know or have experiences in how to build a team, right? So, see how it goes.
No, and very important that we continue to share that message, whether it be minorities, whether it be genders, the acceptance of people to sit and have relationships and continue conversations on any boards. Absolutely. So, folks, probably close out Squeaky Wheel right there. Lawrence, thank you as always for your time. Thanks for sharing our message of the Métis conversation on the Squeaky Wheel. I always appreciate your humor. I appreciate the fact that anybody can pick up the phone and have a conversation with you. I like continuing to add, because we're not in our office, which we talk about every week, but we're getting there. And at the point that we actually get to go and set up our podcast there, and we're not just doing it virtually the way we are now, I'm very excited for that. So big shout out to our friends, our families, and to all of those who are supporting each other through this. We appreciate your time. And I'm Ross, the captain, Memphis Pambrun, CEO of the Memphis Group. And as always, warms my heart.
Well, I'm Lawrence Gervais, regional president, and it warms my heart, hopefully in this colder weather that's coming. But yes, looking forward to Christmas. And my kids had a wonderful birthday on Remembrance Day. And we actually set up the tree for them and pretended like we had the birthday fairy came, because they're 4 turning 5, and they're pretty stoked on opening presents a little bit earlier under the tree.
Thanks for frightening and reminding me that you're right. When the kid's birthday comes around, we're pretty much 6 weeks to Christmas. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Folks, do whatever you can. Enjoy that cold weather. Take a deep breath if the snow comes, and realize Christmas is coming. Use whatever strength you can in order to enjoy that time, even though we're a bit distant. So from Lawrence and Ross from the Squeaky Wheel, all the best wishes, and we'll hope to hear from you next week.